Tony Soprano was never stupid until the writers decided he was. There's suspension of disbelief, and then there's whatever David Chase thought he was doing with Tony's letter to Dr. Melfi. Misspellings like foul and regard may have been intended as a window into Tony's subconscious or a stab at tragicomic realism, but they land more like a clumsy caricature. Look, he's a moron. Subtle as a sledgehammer. Let's be clear. Tony Soprano may not be the second coming of Cicero, but neither is he a barely literate meathead scrawling letters like a remedial third grader. This is a man who got into Seton Hall. Yes, Seton Hall, not East Stroudsburg State, and that likely required a modicum of literacy, or at the very least the ability to string together a college essay with words spelled correctly. One doesn't need to be Phi Beta Kappa to attend, but they do expect applicants to distinguish between birds and homophones. Is it plausible that a middle-aged mob boss who hasn't written more than a phone number in 25 years might forget how to spell regard? Sure. But is it likely that this character, who casually references Freud, watches the History Channel, quotes The Art of War, and waxes philosophical over cold cuts, would send a heartfelt letter riddled with errors like a child learning phonics? That's a stretch, even with artistic license. Tony isn't a bookworm, granted. He dropped out of college, ran numbers instead of essays, and generally treats writing as a suspicious activity best left to people in wiretaps. But within his world, he's intellectually nimble, more articulate than most of his crew, culturally curious in his own way, and entirely capable of navigating complex human dynamics. The idea that he suddenly turns into a linguistic caveman the moment he picks up a pen rings false, not insightful. Of course, some defenders of the scene cling to the notion that this was all a clever bit of symbolism. Maybe foul is a Freudian slip, a subconscious lament over his beloved ducks, now forever associated with his emasculation. Or maybe, and here's a radical idea, the writers just overshot their mark. Tony is sharp enough to understand Freud as a concept. After all, even if he wouldn't be caught dead using that word. There's also the rather tired argument that intelligence doesn't always manifest in grammar. True. There are PhDs who can't spell, CEOs who confuse your, and savants who collapse under the weight of a comma. But Tony Soprano is not a man operating in a vacuum. His literacy, such as it is, was already established. Regressing him for one scene, just to hammer home a point that's already well understood, the mob boss is emotionally stunted, feels less like clever characterization and more like overzealous scriptwriting. So no, Tony doesn't need to be a novelist, but turning him into a barely literate punchline doesn't serve the character. It flattens him. And for a show as richly written as The Sopranos, that's not just a missed opportunity, it's a rare misstep. Everyone blames Jackie Jr. and Noah for being awful. What if Meadow was worse? It's remarkable, really. For someone raised in opulence and educated in liberal elitism, Meadow Soprano's taste in men is less a reflection of standards than a tragicomic extension of her upbringing. Tony and Carmela in different fonts. If dysfunction is the blueprint, then Meadow's romantic history follows it to the letter, and every boyfriend she parades across the screen is just another study in varying shades of obnoxious. Take Finn, the human Ambien tablet. His defining moment? Falling asleep mid-argument, as if channeling CIA torture techniques for inspiration. And not just that, his performative wokeness? Whining about how taking a summer job might displace a minority would be laughable if it weren't so thoroughly spineless. The irony, of course, is that Finn, who exudes the charisma of wet drywall, is arguably the most normal of Meadow's romantic choices. That's less praise and more an indictment of the competition. Enter Noah, a Columbia-bound parasite living off the illusion of self-made merit while coasting on the fumes of his father's influence. Equal parts smug and delusional, he once fancied himself capable of squaring up to Tony Soprano, a bold stance for someone who's never thrown a punch and would likely need a step stool just to reach Tony's jaw. Noah is the embodiment of coastal entitlement, brimming with theory, utterly devoid of self-awareness. And then there's Jackie Jr., the patron saint of poor decisions, Scrabble-playing imbecile, part-time thug, and full-time disaster. His romantic style, if it can be called that, involves such seductive overtures as passive coercion, while Meadow was half-conscious. Unsurprisingly, he later nearly drowned in what can only be described as a symbolic puddle, apropos for a man with the depth of a kiddie pool. But the real constant in this parade of losers is Meadow herself. She doesn't attract dysfunction, she expects it. Raised by a woman whose moral compass only points toward new kitchen appliances, and a man whose love language is money laundering, Meadow never stood a chance at recognizing emotional health, let alone pursuing it. When Finn doesn't reflexively idolize her father's mobbed-up cronies, she takes it as a personal attack. Her inability to grasp why someone might find mob life morally repugnant reveals more about her than it does about Finn. And when her partners do reflect her shallow, manipulative tendencies, it's a seamless match. Her self-righteous blather always one thin veil away from self-serving hypocrisy. She postured as socially conscious until someone touched a nerve. If the series had continued, Meadow would have gone from college campus crusader to suburban watchdog, shrieking about illegal immigration from the comfort of her backyard garden. The truth is, Meadow's boyfriends weren't insufferable in spite of her. They were because of her. And in a world where dysfunction is inherited, she carried the family legacy with pride. The ending of The Sopranos isn't ambiguous, it's mathematical, and it's been screaming the answer at us for 17 years. In the universe of The Sopranos, where symbolism is king and silence is louder than gunfire, it appears the show's most cryptic message wasn't a time, a direction, or a vague threat. It was a number, a single, unassuming digit delivered from beyond the grave. 3. Much has been made of Christopher Moltisanti's eerie near-death message, 3 o'clock, reportedly from Mikey Palmas, presumably from hell. Theories have pinned this on everything from Paulie's witching hour paranoia to the directional placement of the members-only man in Holston's diner. But what if Chris, not exactly a beacon of clarity, got it wrong? What if 3 o'clock wasn't a time or a compass point, but a countdown? Rewatch the final scene through this lens and suddenly the entire sequence is a symphony of threes. It's not subtle, it's not accidental, it's the universe clubbing Tony over the head with a divine drumbeat. 3, 3, 3. The rule of threes, a hit job in triplicate. Start with the people. 3 waitresses greet us. 3 Boy Scouts loiter in a booth. 3 men, including the ominous members-only assassin-in-waiting, hover at the counter. This is less diner decor, more choreographed omen. Then come the actions. Tony flicks through the jukebox 3 times before landing on Journey's Don't Stop Believin', and because nothing is ever simple, that song's selection code? K3. Meanwhile, Meadow, the eternal symbol of hope and unfinished business, fumbles her parking job 3 times. Each attempt delayed, denied, doomed. Objects too fall into the triptych trap. A man in a USA cap nurses a coffee with 3 creamers. After AJ plops down, there are 3 menus on the table. 3 Cokes are delivered, and in the show's quietest sacrament, 3 onion rings are eaten, one by each family member seated. The final supper of a fractured American family. This isn't coincidence. It's ritual. It's prophecy, manifesting in ketchup and jukebox static. The final countdown. The tripartite structure of the scene isn't just aesthetic. It's fatal. The number 3 becomes a ticking clock, a cosmic countdown hidden in the clatter of cutlery and failed parallel parking. A message from the great beyond, initially misread, now revealed in full cinematic dread. And then, the tragic poetry of Meadow. Once envisioned as Tony's guardian angel during his coma limbo, here she becomes the ultimate casualty of the pattern. Held back, delayed, denied entry into the final moment. The number 3 doesn't just dictate the scene, it prevents its disruption. Meadow doesn't get to the table, not because she's late, but because she never stood a chance. The rule of threes had already cast its final vote. The holy trinity of death, Tony, Carmela, AJ. 3 onion rings, 3 final bites, 3 unknowing participants, and a sacred execution disguised as dinner. This is the show's communion, its last supper. The members-only man plays his role perfectly. He approaches from Tony's 3 o'clock, still honoring the directional symbolism with all the subtlety of a biblical plague. Chris's warning wasn't metaphorical, it was mathematical. And Paulie? Paulie. In this apocalyptic arithmetic, Paulie Gualtieri remains untouched. Why? Because he never makes it to 3. 2 laughs per joke, 2 wings in his silver coiffure, 2 mothers, 2 bruised testicles. He lives his life in 2s and stops there, stubbornly and supernaturally. While others march toward their numbered fate, Paulie avoids the pattern entirely. That's not just survival, that's strategy. So no, this isn't the ravings of a student swimming in numerology. This is The Sopranos at its most deliberate, a masterpiece of narrative precision hiding in plain sight. The prophecy of 3 wasn't a warning, it was a promise. And in Holston's, that promise was fulfilled. 1, 2, 3. Fade to black. This is the exact moment Christopher Moltisanti lost all credibility. Not just as a mobster, but as a man. In a moment that was equal parts pathetic and predatory, Christopher Moltisanti decides to drape himself across 2 women on a couch, one of whom, unbeknownst to him, happens to be an undercover federal agent. Ever the Casanova, he tries his luck with a clumsy thigh grab and a few ill-advised tickles to Danielle's bare midriff. Her reaction is immediate and telling. She recoils, not flirtatiously, not coyly, but with the unmistakable discomfort of someone on the verge of either vomiting or calling internal affairs. Now, some might entertain the tinfoil theory that she flinched because she was wired and feared he'd discover it, but that credits Christopher with a level of perceptiveness he's never once displayed. Danielle wasn't protecting her cover, she was protecting her dignity. She wasn't there to collect intel. Her task was to turn Adriana into an informant, not seduce a man-child in a leather jacket and call it surveillance. It's painfully obvious that Danielle in that moment wasn't in character. She was herself, looking at this greasy, emotionally volatile underboss with all the revulsion of a woman forced to flirt with a sewer rat for the sake of her career. To her, Christopher wasn't dangerous or mysterious. He was weak, unstable, and embarrassingly easy to manipulate. A wannabe alpha with the self-awareness of a wet mop. And yet, as always, Christopher's delusion of charm shines through. He's not trying to be creepy, he insists. He's just being nice. After all, Danielle is Adriana's friend. What could be more gentlemanly than propositioning your girlfriend's bestie for a potential threesome? In his mind, this is diplomacy, modern chivalry. Cue the inevitable meltdown when the women don't respond with rapture. Christopher, wounded by the rejection, lashes out in that signature Moltisanti way. Furious, self-righteous, and hilariously hypocritical. He fumes over being called an embarrassment, as if the sausage and peppers he inhales on a nightly basis aren't already writing his obituary. The irony, of course, is thick enough to slice. Christopher views Danielle's rejection not as discomfort or revulsion, but as a sign of her moral struggle. Clearly, she must be fighting temptation. Who wouldn't, when presented with the raw, oiled-up charisma of a man who looks like a Calvin Klein ad left out in the rain? And then, as if to justify his behavior, we're expected to nod along with the classic excuse, he's only human. Because of course, what else could a man do when flanked by two stunning women but attempt a clumsy seduction in mid-conversation? The logic is as bullet-riddled as his conscience. Ultimately, the scene is a masterclass in what The Sopranos does best, exposing the fragile egos and deluded fantasies of men who believe power entitles them to affection, and that violence, charm, or a leather couch can mask the truth. Christopher isn't a victim of misplaced good intentions. He's a predator fumbling in the dark, mistaking pity for desire and silence for consent. And Danielle? She wasn't flattered. She was calculating the fastest way to make an exit, before the couch or Christopher turned into a crime scene. Meadow Soprano didn't break the cycle. She perfected it. Life is simple for everybody who isn't expecting things to be handed to them. That's Meadow Soprano delivering a line so lacking in self-awareness it could be printed on the family crest. She offers this nugget of wisdom while lounging comfortably in the lap of mob-funded luxury. Tuition paid by Tony, travel financed by Tony, elite college applications greased by Tony, even her boyfriend's honest construction job, gift-wrapped by Tony. And yet, Meadow somehow positions herself as a paragon of meritocratic virtue. The irony writes itself. In a moment that manages to be both revealing and entirely unsurprising, Meadow, who has never once declined the benefits of her father's criminal empire, lectures her mother about moral integrity. Carmela, to her credit, barely dignifies the hypocrisy with a response. It's one of the few times someone on the show calls Meadow's bluff and doesn't immediately back down. But then, this is The Sopranos, a series where nearly every relationship thrives on mutual delusion and shared hypocrisy. No one walks away clean, and no one really wants to. Characters constantly call each other out for their moral failings, and more often than not, they're both right. It's a web of self-justification so dense it could only exist in a household where blood money is just called income. Meadow never comes close to escaping Tony's influence because she never really tries. The concept of rejecting her father's dirty money or declining his backroom favors never makes it to her moral radar. Student loans? Jobs without family strings? Too mundane, too honest, and far too beneath her. She takes without hesitation, all while judging those around her for doing the same. The hypocrisy isn't incidental, it's the point. The show doesn't ask if Meadow is complicit, it shows us that she always was. Yes, she gets good grades. Yes, she excels in elite environments, but so what? Academic success doesn't cleanse moral rot, it just gives it better diction. Meadow begins as a girl who wants to be a doctor, a savior, someone who matters. By the finale, she's on track to become a mob lawyer, romantically linked to the heir of another crime family, fresh off watching her father get gunned down in front of her. This is not a redemption arc, it's a closed circle. There's a temptation to see Meadow as a victim, a child born into corruption, trying to make sense of injustice by intellectualizing it, externalizing it, and pretending she stands apart from it. But at some point, that illusion wears thin. She wasn't a pawn. She was a well-fed one, groomed for exactly the kind of comfortable complicity she now lives in. The only person who could have cut the strings, Carmela, chose instead to reinforce them, draped in gold and guilt. Meadow wasn't begging to be saved. She was performing, hoping someone would validate the lie that she was different. But money talks, and in the Soprano household, it sings lullabies of denial. Uncle Junior wasn't betrayed. He was exposed. Among the many colorful trademarks of the Sopranos, few are as delightfully absurd or telling as the exaggerated "oh" uttered by nearly every made man with any screen time, whether reacting to gossip, violence, or a particularly pungent tray of baked ziti. The likes of Tony, Paulie, Silvio, and Christopher all indulged in the signature soundbite. It was part theatrical flourish, part cultural shorthand, a verbal shrug, groan, or cheer, all wrapped in vowel-heavy bravado. And then there was Corrado Jr.'s soprano, nary an ooh to be found. This omission is hardly accidental. Uncle June's refusal, or perhaps inability, to partake in the exaggerated ritual speaks volumes about who he is, and why his reign as boss was doomed before it began. Unlike Tony, whose leadership was punctuated by moments of disarming camaraderie with his crew, Junior kept everyone at arm's length. Even his rare attempts at humor were laced with bitterness or self-importance. He didn't pass the salt, he passed judgment. Charmless, isolated, and incapable of meeting his men on their level, Junior governed from a pedestal, not a social circle. Yes, he did utter a single defeated "ooh, fuck me," while soiling himself in the care of a mentally unwell woman, but let's not pretend that counts. By then, the meat was overcooked, the sauce congealed, and Junior was already a shadow of a man, haunted more by his own irrelevance than the FBI. It's tempting to chalk this all up to generational distance, the idea that Junior was from an old school, where emotions stayed bottled and syllables came sparingly, but that would be generous. The truth is, Corrado wasn't some timeless patriarch ousted by modernity. He was a petty, insecure relic who mistook paranoia for power. His attempts to lead were marked not by strategy, but by spite. He undermined Jackie Aprile, then turned his focus to Tony, failing both times to recognize that leadership isn't something seized through whining and backdoor politics. It's earned through respect and presence. Instead of carving out a stable niche as a wealthy, respected capo with a goomer in Boca and plausible deniability in Jersey, Junior insisted on chasing a crown he was never built to wear. And let's not forget, had he been a bit more self-aware, he might have followed the Carmine Lupertazzi Jr. model. Rich, involved, but ultimately unbothered by who sat in the big chair. Instead, he invited the worst of both worlds: responsibility without loyalty, power without support, and inevitable betrayal. He was passed over first by his younger brother, then by Tony, and each time he emerged not wiser or more cautious, but bitter and vengeful. His eventual unraveling was less a tragedy than an inevitability. So yes, Uncle Junior never said ooh, but the silence speaks for itself. If you think Vito was being generous, you completely misunderstood that scene. In The Sopranos, violence may be a currency, but delegation is the real power move. Case in point, early in season 6, Vito Spatafore casually tips Paulie Gualtieri off to a lucrative opportunity, a stash house run by Colombian drug dealers overflowing with untraceable cash. Paulie, ever the loyal warhorse, storms in with a goon, gets into a shootout, and walks out richer. But of course, not before the inevitable squabble over the split. With Tony still playing suburban dreamer Kevin Finnerty, Silvio is left to referee the playground. 50-50, boys. Share nicely. The more pressing question is why Vito didn't just keep the score for himself. He could have sent his own crew, reaped the profits, and avoided the headache of splitting anything with Paulie. But no, he chose to pass the risk off. And that's precisely the point. Vito by this stage is a white-collar gangster wrapped in silk shirts and real estate deals. His weapon of choice is an invoice. He's built a world where getting his hands dirty is both inefficient and beneath him. Paulie, by contrast, is a relic of the old guard. Brutal, loyal, and eternally eager to shoot someone in the face if it means a payday. Vito knows what he's doing. Outsource the risk. Bank the reward. And it's not without precedent. This isn't the first time a captain has passed along a hot tip. Paulie did the same with Ralphie in a prior episode, resulting in Ralphie's crew raking in the profits while Paulie complained about being left out in the cold. Literally, little Paulie shivering outside while Ralphie's guys made off with the loot remains one of the show's comedic high points. Paulie seething with wounded pride, Ralphie basking in his own smug brilliance, and Furio cursing in Italian as he tumbles post-shooting. All the elegance of a Shakespearean farce if Shakespeare had written for HBO. The underlying logic here seems to be territorial. captains may have first rights to action on their turf, even if the opportunity is floated by someone else, Vito may have recognized that the job fell within Polly's domain, whether formally or by unwritten rule, and offered the tip as a courtesy, with a hefty cut expected naturally. It's not generosity, it's politics. That dynamic mirrors much of the Sopranos' brilliance, petty grievances wrapped in blood and bureaucracy. Polly, eternally suspicious of slights, turns every shared job into a potential betrayal. Ralphie weaponizes charm and sarcasm, infuriating everyone but Tony, who despite his contempt for Ralphie, recognizes utility when he sees it. Silvio, ever the exasperated conciliere, plays arbiter while visibly longing for a business where people just did their jobs without guns or tantrums. One almost expects the crew to wander into a Seinfeld episode by accident. Paulie, with his neurotic paranoia, is clearly George. Furio's pratfall casts him as Kramer. Tony, juggling everyone's egos while quietly loathing them all, channels Jerry. Ralphie's acerbic wit, Elaine with a body count, and Silvio, possibly Newman, if Newman had to negotiate splits on drug money and body disposal. As for the Colombians, curiously absent from any retribution arc, one might expect a major cartel to take issue with the theft of a small mountain of their money. Yet in typical Sopranos fashion, the silence is deafening. Perhaps they didn't notice. Perhaps they understood the rules of engagement in North Jersey. If you're going to run product on someone else's turf, don't expect a polite invoice when it goes missing. In the end, Vito's move is less about cowardice than clarity. He understands the game he's in, and more importantly, the one he's not. When muscle is needed, send the man who still thinks with his fists. Vito may not survive the season, but at least he understood this fundamental truth of mob life. Let the grunts bleed. You just collect the vig. Ever watched that D-girl scene and thought, what the hell did Chris say to make a grown man run like that? Ah yes, the Sopranos D-girl episode, where Hollywood dreams go to die and Christopher Moltisanti momentarily proves he's not just a hot-headed junkie, but also a surprisingly poised threat when it counts. One of the most fascinating moments, blink and you'll miss it, is when Christopher leans in and whispers something to a Wall Street bro who's clearly too self-assured for his own good. The reaction? Sheer panic. The guy bolts, visibly shaken, his entourage scrambling behind him like scared interns after a bad quarterly report. The question has lingered ever since. What did Christopher say? No, it wasn't a punchline. It wasn't a joke about Amy's promised sexual favors, or a bizarre declaration of sausage-based masculinity, though the fan theorists certainly gave us those gems. The more grounded theory, and one that Michael Imperioli himself has confirmed, is refreshingly simple and far more chilling. Christopher pressed his gun into the guy and murmured, "Feel this?" That's it. No long speech, no operatic monologue, just one loaded line, literally, and the pressure of cold steel under a tailored suit. The Wall Street bro, clearly unfamiliar with how real power operates outside the boardroom, got the message. Loud and clear, and that's the brilliance of it. Christopher, in an episode that otherwise showcases his instability and artistic delusions, delivers one of the most effective moments of intimidation in the entire series. He doesn't scream. He doesn't flail. He doesn't need backup. Instead, he weaponizes silence and implication, leaving a stronger impression than any of the bluster around him. Ironically, this same Christopher also offers the most emotionally resonant eulogy at Brendan Fallone's funeral, meandering through loyalty, love, and existential despair in a speech that somehow includes both a declaration of brotherhood, "We're with the Vipers," and a hilariously grotesque offer to "suck your cocks, all you guys." A true poet. But make no mistake, the whisper was no punchline. It was power, pure and undiluted. It was the moment the mouse roared and the lion ran. The mob doesn't follow omerta, they weaponize it. In the grand opera of organized crime, particularly as depicted in The Sopranos, one commandment reigns supreme: thou shalt not rat. This sacred oath, omerta, is treated as inviolable, to the point that even acknowledging the mafia's existence in court is seen as a betrayal. And yet, the very same men who hold this code aloft seem to violate it whenever it's politically expedient. Enter Feech La Manna. Tony Soprano's decision to have Feech sent back to prison via his parole officer isn't considered ratting. Why not? Because apparently when a mob boss sets up a fellow wise guy using the justice system, so long as it's done without directly handing over past crimes to law enforcement, it magically transforms into strategy rather than treachery. It's not snitching. You see, it's a move. Feech's downfall wasn't the result of Tony marching into a precinct and testifying about car thefts or landscaper assaults. No, the plan was far more elegant, at least by mob standards. Chris and Benny, acting under Tony's direction, lured Feach into violating parole by unloading stolen TVs, on tape. Not a word about the crimes he'd already committed. No loose lips, just a tightly choreographed setup served cold. And therein lies the delicious hypocrisy. The mob, that bastion of misplaced masculinity and performative loyalty, bends its own rules with the flexibility of a contortionist in a confession booth. Killing Feach outright would have been too politically messy. Setting him up, however, was simply good management. What the show masterfully exposes, and what some viewers routinely miss in their attempt to mythologize the mafia, is that this world operates on a fluid morality. There is no consistent code, no honorable thieves. There are only sociopaths with their own sliding scale of what's acceptable, so long as it serves power and preserves appearances. So no, Tony didn't rat on Feach. He simply weaponized the system in a way that avoided bloodshed and kept his hands clean. And in the world of The Sopranos, that's not breaking the code. That is the code. Subscribe for more breakdown.